Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Sonship Review Part 8, and this is Session 8. So, we're in the midst of this thing on Matthew, and look, what I was saying to you is each one of these divisions have a focal point. But look, the reason I wanted to write this on the board and clear this up is because in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 7, verse 29, Let me tell you, now I'm not going to write the Sermon on the Mount on there. I've already told you that's the focal point of what those chapters are coming to. But let me tell you the essence of what that is. This is foundational doctrine that allows them to do a few things. And I'll tell you what those are. The first thing it allows them to do is to two S's, A-S-S, that's what I was going to put two C's. Why am I replacing C's for S's today? Disassociate, C8, there it is. Disassociate them. They're learning the foundational doctrines that will allow them to disassociate themselves from who? Guess who? Yeah, from the apostate element of the nation. So that's the first thing that's doing. The second thing that's doing is it's giving them the foundational doctrines to be salt and light. Remember, it's there that Jesus talks about, you are the salt of the world, and if the salt hath lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? You're the light of the world, and he talks about all of that. They're learning the foundational doctrines in these first 7 chapters to remove themselves from being affiliated, I can spell affiliate, to be affiliated with the apostate element. They're learning the foundational doctrines to be salt and light. That's very important. And then they are learning the foundational doctrines of how to make an impact. I didn't write that, but how to make an impact to the glory of God in the face of both apostate Israel and the Gentiles. I guess I should just write that up above just so that you'll get that. How to make an impact to the glory of God in the face of the apostate nation and the Gentiles. Now, that's kind of a nutshell of what's going on in that first one. Here's the second one. Matthew chapter 8, verse 1 to chapter 16, verse 20. That's the second division in the book of Matthew. And this has to do with the parables of the kingdom, which means this is going to center mostly in Matthew chapter 13. That's the focal point of this section. Now, even though back in the Old Testament, a lot of things were, if I were to ask you that question, you would know the answer. If I said, was there anything written back in the Old Testament that was preparing this little flock for the things that they were going to go through, that they could go back and read, and that would be a help to them? Of course there is. But let me just say this. There are some things that were going to be said or written that instead of saying it all, in other words, there's a lot of what Jesus said that was already written back there, but there were some things that He taught them. Now just do like the kids for a moment and think about your legend. You're actually, if you're living at the time of Jesus and everybody in this room is part of the little flock, you have believed that He is the Christ, you believe that gospel of the kingdom, and so to the little flock. So what Jesus is doing is, not every single thing that could be said was said back there in the prophets. There were some things that waited to be said to the little flock during the time of His earthly ministry, that He was going to say to them. Are you with me? So what you have in the first section is foundational doctrine for really three separate issues. Get away from the apostate nation, be salt and light, and make an impact to God's glory on everybody else. In the second part, it's like there's some things that we want to talk, that Jesus said, I want to talk to you, little flock, about some things that were not said back in your scriptures. And so can anybody guess, and this may be unfair, what in the world would He want to talk to them about? Now, you could probably think of a dozen things. Don't answer. I'll just make it rhetorical. Here's what He's talking to them about. How to deal with apostate Israel. See, in this first one, it's just foundational doctrine that says you need to separate yourself from them. But He hasn't yet taught them how to deal with the things now that are going to be happening to them. And things are going to be happening to them because they disassociated themselves. Because they did make an impact to the glory of God. So the nation, the unsaved part of the nation, is going to be reacting against that. And the little flock, are they going to be suffering at all? Sure. And so He says, look, I want to talk to you personally now about how to deal with the things that are going to be happening to you. Well, that's pretty wise. Because not all of that, not every bit of that is sitting back in the Scriptures. So the Lord waits to do that. Now, the third part is Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. So you can see that this one didn't do the whole chapter. To 23, 39. And that is the end of chapter 23, by the way. So there's the third. So there's the first, there's the second, there's the third. And then let me show you what this third part is about. It is the Lord's final denouncement of Israel's vain religious system. And I want to talk to you about that. I'm not going to rewrite that part, but this is mostly going to focus in Matthew chapters 22 and 23. Now, I'm not saying the other that 21 doesn't have anything. The end of 21 does have something to do with that. But 22 is the main one, and then getting into 23. And here's what He's doing here. He is preparing the little flock for... He is preparing the little flock for persecutions from the religious leaders of the vain religious system. Now, those things that He is teaching them, you say, well, isn't that what He's doing here? But this is actually another step. This is sort of how to deal with the apostate nation at this present time. The things that are being taught to them here actually have an application to a degree. Look, they have an application to the extension of mercy. You know what that is? That's following the cross. But they especially have an application for when they're out in the tribulation. Daniel's 70th week. Am I getting too low on the board for y'all to see it? Don't go any further, huh? I'll switch over for the fourth one. Oh, okay. Well, okay. There you go. All right. Okay, just to make sure that I haven't confused, does everybody kind of understand the difference there? This one, he is talking about how to deal with apostate Israel, but he's really talking about during his earthly ministry. Are things going to be different out during the tribulation? Are they going to be different than they are during his earthly ministry? Oh, yes. Now look, I'm going to tell you something. I really wanted to wait until I could tell you this within the context of a study so that you would understand it fully. If I just say it to you, I don't know what it'll mean, but I'm just going to say it without surrounding it with a bunch of proof text. And here it is. That vain religious system, you can see this not only back in the Old Testament, but it has 3 phases to it. And those phases ramp up with each one of those. And they have a certain thing that each one of those phases are doing. We're going to get a chance to look at one of them in a little bit of detail, but I'm not really going to be talking to you about just that vain religious system. Look, that all got started way back before Jesus showed up. But that first phase goes into operation during the earthly ministry of Jesus. And it's during that earthly ministry that first phase, does anybody, let me ask you a question. What did they do to him at the end of his earthly ministry? What did Israel do to him? They killed him, right? The end of phase 1 was the cross. Now to them, they weren't thinking about let's put him on as the Redeemer. They were thinking let's execute him as a criminal. So that's what phase 1 was doing. Just thinking about Israel's program, can anybody guess when phase 2 is going to come into operation? Because it's going to be different. It's going to work differently. Now it's still going to be continuing, but if phase 1 takes place during the earthly ministry of Jesus and ends at the cross, what is phase 2 of the vain religious system? Are y'all just scared to guess? During the extension of mercy. And that's going to end with what? Well, no. It's going to... the stoning of Stephen. So there's going to be a third phase. This is all back there in the Old Testament. Look, when I taught you about the courses of punishment, that was just the bare, rudimentary, fundamental understanding of the things of Israel's program. Now we're talking about a more detailed look at those things. Phase 3, anybody want to take a wild guess about when phase 3 of Israel's vain religious system cranks up? Yeah. Out there in the tribulation. Okay, so what I'm saying is, what's happening in each of these phases is something a little bit different. Because for the vain religious system, it is ramping up to get itself to a final goal, so to speak. Satan is the one behind this, of course. But look, and so here's what I'm saying. In the third part of the book of Matthew, he is preparing them for the persecutions that will come from the religious leaders, the movers and shakers of that vain religious system. But this one doesn't have so much to do with phase 1. It has some things to do with phase 2, but this is really focused on phase 3, dealing with those tribulations out there in phase 3. Now we come to the last one, And that's Matthew 24:1 through the end of the book of Matthew, chapter 28, verse 20. And the main focal point, as you might have guessed, is the Olivet discourse, which makes that Matthew chapter 24. Matthew 24 is that main. I'm not saying the other chapters don't have anything to do with that, but what they're doing is this. I got to come all the way over here now. Matthew chapter 24, verse 1 to chapter 28 and verse 20. It is Matthew 24 is the focal point. That's the Olivet discourse. But let me tell you what this is doing. This is equipping the little flock. This is equipping the little flock to do two things right off the bat. To be able to handle, there is a third thing, but we'll add it at the end. To be able to handle the book of Daniel so that they have an understanding of the timeline of the things that are going to be happening out there in the last days. The second thing it's going to be doing, it's going to be allowing them to handle Zechariah, because there are visions that are given in Zechariah that go hand in hand with the timeline that's given in Daniel. And those two together now will bring us to this third thing, and that is only by understanding the timeline in Daniel and the visions in Zechariah are they going to be able to pick up John's book of Revelation and be able to fully now understand the events that they're right in the middle of out there in that last day. So this last one is not really about having them deal with the tribulations and the afflictions and the persecutions and all of those things. This is about equipping them now to be able to take these things that were sitting back there in their scriptures and put it together with what John wrote in Revelation, and from the now to be able to look at that and say, once they get all of that, they'll be able to open up the book of Revelation, and whatever is happening, they'll be able to look at that. They'll be able to stretch that timeline out. They'll be able to leave those visions and then look at Revelation and go, we're right here. This is where we are. This is what is about to happen. If you're in danger, wouldn't it be good to not only know where you are in the events, but know ahead of time what the bad guys are about to do? And that's exactly what they're being equipped to do. Now, so when we see the book of Matthew, here's what we think. Oh yeah, it's Jesus doing a bunch of good miracles for everybody, and then he gets crucified, and we just kind of see it that way. You know, we just see Jesus going around doing a bunch of good miracles, and at the end, he dies on the cross. And we like that because he dies for our sin. Paul says we glory in the cross. Okay. But for who the book of Matthew was written to, there is much more sitting in here than that. What is sitting in here now is the foundation. And by the way, I'll say one other thing about this, then we'll move on. What's sitting here in these first 7 chapters of the book of Matthew, when I said it's the foundational doctrine to do these 3 things, let me say this. Everything else that Jesus says to them, everything else is built on that foundation of those first 7 chapters. And they're supposed to see it that way. Can I just make a parallel thing here? Everything, okay, look, we talked about in Romans 1 through 5, it was our justification, and 6 through 8, it was our sanctification. From 8 through 11, it was our establishment, and we get into 12, and we start going through to 15, the middle of 15. That's our education. Look, the things that were said back here, this is everything in the education is built on that. But let me go even further. All this that we're going to be taught from Romans 12, 3 to 15, 7. Everything that follows after that, pick a book, Ephesians, Colossians, Thessalonians, it's all built on this foundation. This is the foundation for the education. This is the initial instruction. It's the foundational doctrine of our education, and everything else Paul is going to teach us is resting on this foundation. When I actually thought about saying this to you, I thought about, but I just ran out of board space, I thought about just making a foundation here and saying, you know what, here's the education, and putting the other books up and just adding on top of it. You know, that's how all that, but it works with them the same way. Does everybody see that? So when you see what's happening in the book of Matthew here, what I'm hoping these few minutes that we're doing this is going to do is cause you to be able to see what God's doing in the Bible is not just collecting a bunch of Sunday school stories. This is something that's vital for them, and it's running along the same parallel tracks, so to speak, as what's going to be happening for us. So that when you're reading in Romans, you're not just reading, you know what, Romans doesn't have any stories in it. That's why people don't like Romans. There's no loaves and fishes being divided. There's no waters parting. There's no, walking on the water. There's not any of that. Romans is like a book with no pictures. But this is our instruction. This is the basics of our instruction. So do you understand, when I look at that, I see if we don't get that basic foundation poured right, we're not building anything on top of that. It's all just fun and games then. Okay, so now, as I told you a moment ago, where did I write it? This is a mess. I don't even know where I wrote stuff now. But I told you we were going, I guess I erased it. We were going to be in Matthew 21. I just gave you this to give you a context for that. So when I tell you we're about to look at a reference in Matthew 21, what can you do now that you couldn't do 45 minutes ago? You can look at this breakdown and you can say, hey, this is in the third section of the book of Matthew. And I know what's happening in that third section. That is, the Lord is making a final denouncement against Israel's vain religious system. Because after that, guess what's going to happen? They're going to crucify Him. Phase 1 of that vain religious system is going to end in His death. They're going to execute Him. That's what they're after there. And you also know that He is preparing them for persecutions from the religious leaders. Who are the religious leaders of the vain religious system? Don't give me names, give me positions. Huh? Pharisees? Huh? What? Oh, Sadducees. Okay, that's fine. Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, the chief priests, all of those guys. They're all, you kind of look at them all the same, don't you? They're in one big group, and you should. But look, these guys, why these guys? Because they're the ones that are driving this, right? The rest of Israel is just kind of like, well, I don't know. I just want to watch the game Saturday. I don't care what y'all do. Okay, I'm being facetious, but it's not the game. We're just going to the Coliseum. Okay, so you get it, right? They're driving this thing. They're stirring the people up, but they're the ones that are behind it. All right, so now let's go to Matthew 21, because here's what we know. Actually, what he's doing is he is already starting, even though I told you the main thrust of this is going to be found in 22, bleed over a little bit in 23. Even in 21, he's setting this up already to tell them that you guys are already gearing up phase 1 of this. And he's going to talk about them. So let's just read it together as we go through. Come on. Oh no. Oh no. I didn't put the first part of it in on my PowerPoint. You'll have to turn there in your Bible. Matthew chapter 20. Well, it's in your notes. Don't you have it in your notes? Starting with 33. All right, you got it in your notes, so at least I got that right. Can I just, hold on, I can make myself a note that this is not in, put this in the PowerPoint. Wow, how did I miss that? All right, Matthew 21:33. Hear another parable. There was a certain householder which planted a vineyard and hedged it about and digged a winepress in it and built a tower and let it out to husbandmen and went into a far country. And when the time of the fruit drew near, by the way, he planted a vineyard. He's got all the stuff in there so that when it comes in, he's got a wine press. He's got everything in place, right? Verse 34, and when the time of the fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the husbandmen that they might receive the fruits of it. And the husbandman took his servants and beat one and killed another and stoned another. Again, he sent other servants more than the first, and they did unto them likewise. But last of all, he sent unto them his son, saying, they will reverence my son. But when the husbandmen saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and let us seize on his inheritance. And they caught him and cast him out of the vineyard and slew him. When the Lord thereof of the vineyard cometh, what will he do unto those husbandmen? Now you have to remember, he's talking to the religious leaders here. So when he tells this parable, he gets that far, he says, well, hey, when the owner comes, what's he going to do to these husbandmen? And just as you guys correctly identified, that's the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the chief priest, all that. Look in verse 41. Where am I in this? I'm not even going to get it, am I? 41, okay. They say unto him, he will miserably destroy those wicked men, and will let out his vineyard unto other, and that should be husbandmen. I just left the H off for some reason. Husbandmen, which shall render him the fruits in their seasons. Well, that's a good answer, isn't it? They knew exactly what he would do. He will, and I like that term, he will miserably destroy those wicked men. And then he'll put other guys in charge of it who will actually give him the fruits of that vineyard when it comes. Now, I know the thing went off, but I need to go a little further. Verse 42. Jesus saith unto them, did you never read in the Scriptures, the stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner? This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Now he's quoting something because he says, did you never read? It is written. And I want to take you back over to where that is written. But I needed to get to that place because, look, in connection with what just is about to happen. By the way, when they get to the end of this, you know what it's going to say? And at the end it says, and they perceived that he spake of them. They understood. Wait a minute. He's telling a story that's about us. So he is going to now, before he ends this, he's going to go back to 42 and say, did you never read in the Scriptures, by the way, the ye is a plural. He's talking to all of them. Did you guys never read in the Scriptures? The stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner. This is the Lord's doing, and it's marvelous in our eyes. All right, and we'll stop right there. We'll pick this up after the break, because now we're coming to the stumbling stone issue. When Jesus mentions this, it's not the first time it's been mentioned. And when Paul writes about it in Romans 9, it's not the first time. This was sitting back in the book of Isaiah. So we'll get a chance to look at that when we come back.